Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. Happy you can join us for a pretty action-packed May podcast. I am coming to you from Detroit this week. I had some work to do over at the Lions this week for something you'll be reading about in the near future. So that was a good time, spending some time at a team I don't really touch all that much, the Detroit Lions. A lot of good is happening there. We've got a lot to talk about, my buddy Paul Burmeister and I from NBC Sports. Let's just go over the quick little rundown of what we'll have. First of all, our guest this week is going to be Joe Douglas, the Jets general manager. I think what I'm going to do on my last three podcasts before the break, which this is one, there will be another one May 18, another one May 25, and then I'll break for the summer. What I'm going to do is basically pick out a team that I think is really improved and talk a little bit about that team, get somebody on, a GM, player, coach, whatever from that team. So we're going to look at the Jets a little bit this week. Also, we've got 5 other topics this week. We're going to talk about one of the themes in this year's draft that I thought was really quite encouraging, and that is teams not overvaluing the quarterbacks in this draft, which is a rarity in this NFL. But I think teams were very, very smart this year. We're going to touch on the Giants' release of their best defensive back, James Bradberry. Joe Schoen, the general manager, is not fooling around. The Raiders are in some front office mayhem. Does that mean anything on the field? I pretty much am going to say no, but we'll get into that a little bit. We're going to have a deep dive into the odd trade between the Lions and the Vikings. 2 division teams making a trade that could affect the balance of power in the division for some time to come. And, 2 other things that have come up just in the last, actually one of them in the last few minutes before we record this on Tuesday morning. Tom Brady agreeing to be Fox's #1 NFL analyst whenever he does retire, which I suppose will be about 2047. And then I want to get into a little bit of the Seattle Seahawks quarterback situation from something I wrote this week in my column, and I have been bombarded with emails and tweets about what I wrote about them. We're going to get into the Seahawks a little bit here as well. So, Paul, thanks for being with me again this year. How's the USFL experience this weekend? What did you have?
Let's see. This past weekend, I had New Jersey winning again. New Jersey winning for a 3rd time in a row. And this coming weekend, fun challenge. I've been working with a former Big Ten MVP and 8-year NFL vet, Michael Robinson, in the booth the first 4 weeks. Now we're going to have Cam Jordan, all-pro D lineman from the Saints, is going to join us for a 3-man booth on Friday nights. I know Cam is super excited about kind of testing the waters here and seeing what it's like to be in the booth, and we're pumped to have him. So we'll see how the game turns out, but a 3-man booth is always a fun challenge. Looking forward to getting to know Cam a little bit.
Cam Jordan is a really smart guy and an interesting guy. First of all, when he gets on a topic, he can talk a mile a minute. So I wonder if sometimes you might have to slow him down a little bit, because he really gets excited and he's really into what he's talking about. So I've always thought Cam Jordan would be a great analyst. So hope everything works out with that. So Paul, let's dive in right now. We're going to, as I say, we're going to be joined later on in the podcast by Joe Douglas, the GM of the Jets. I'm really curious. I look at the Jets and it's like so many other teams that you can say, man, they've done a lot. But what about the quarterback? Actually, I think there's one other worry that I would have if I were the Jets, and that is Mekhi Becton, who was obviously a first-round pick at tackle a couple of years ago, started off great in that 4-tackle first round. You remember the first half of the first round where 4 tackles were picked by the Giants, Jets, Browns, and Bucks. And I guess ironic is not the right word, but strange that the last pick, Tristan Wirfs, has actually turned out to be the best player so far of those 4 tackles. But Mekhi Becton would worry me. Overall, though, I think what I've seen in the Jets, I really, really like so far. And I particularly like how Joe Douglas has set up this team, which is with 2 big trades, trading away Jamal Adams, trading away Sam Darnold, and essentially getting enough out of those 2 trades to build with a lot of new pieces. So I think this is the first time in a while. And again, look, there was the blip on the radar with the Jets, with Rex Ryan and Mike Tannenbaum being good 6 or 8 years ago. But it really seems like now this is more of a long haul setup. I want to hear what you think.
I thought it was fun the way you introduced this this part of your column, talking to Rich Eisen and Mike Greenberg a little bit, 2 longtime Jets fans. And Greeny said dramatic improvements is very reasonable. I would like to, as a non-Jets fan, just as an NFL fan, I would say reasonable improvement is realistic with the Jets. And I think that's a great place to start for any team. But you look at, to me, I like to sort it at this time of the offseason, Peter, kind of sort it into what's happening in your division and how do you compare after the offseason moves, and then into your comps in your conference. So you start with the AFC East, and they're the 4th best team. I mean, last year they were the only team in the AFC East, Peter, that didn't have a winning record. They were 5 games behind the other team that was just ahead of them, the Miami Dolphins. So where are they right now compared to Miami? Are they closer? I would say yes. But again, realistically, they were quite a ways behind the next worst team in their division when the season ended. And the comps in the AFC, they're with the Jaguars and the Texans. So you look at the Jets, Jags, and Texans, where do the Jets stack up? I would say they had the most encouraging offseason. But let's start with what's realistic. And I think, if they double their wins from last year, they're right around 500. And I think that's a realistic hope for any Jets fan before they start charging into thinking that a sexy draft can lead to 11 or 12 wins.
I really like that thought of being a little bit more realistic. And one of the things you'll hear from Joe Douglas is that, I think a lot of times when you look at the quarterback situation, like for instance, the Detroit Lions, everybody knows there's tremendous pressure on Jared Goff, and while I have been in Detroit, I met with Goff on Monday. And look, here's the thing with Jared Goff. He's an accurate passer. And if you ask him to complete the throws that are there, I think that's the smartest thing you do with Jared Goff. You don't ask him to do too much that he's not really capable of doing. There was a time early on in the rise of the Rams. I remember a Thursday night game against the Vikings where he was a bombs away guy, but that was more of, a cameo in Jared Goff. I think of the same thing right now with Zach Wilson. We don't really know who Zach Wilson is. We don't know what he is. And as a quarterback, you know what I want him to do? I want him to take the throws that are there. I don't want him to do too much. I thought one of the things the Patriots did last year with Mac Jones that was very smart. They brought in, 2 big tight ends in free agency. And they tried to make this kind of like going back to a Gronk Hernandez kind of offensive style. And I think in some ways, the New York Jets have taken a page out of that playbook by adding a couple of veteran tight ends, particularly CJ Uzomah from Cincinnati, who in my opinion, I think that's a big loss for the Bengals. And I think it's a big get for the Jets. Give your quarterback a security blanket. And Paul, the thing I want to ask you about Zach Wilson is that, at least to me, when I look at this team, I want him to get a running back who's very good at catching the ball out of the backfield. Breece Hall is that guy, the best pass catching running back among the good backs in this draft. And then secondarily, get a tight end who can really help you out. And to me, it's another thing I really like that what Joe Douglas has done. Just give me a thought or two about the importance of playmakers in the short and intermediate game to a young quarterback.
Obviously, it's huge, Peter. And I think if you look at specifically the situation with the Jets right now, you bring up a couple very good points about how they have plausibly enhanced the tight end position with Uzomah, Ruckert, third-round pick out of Ohio State. Let's also not forget, and also Breece Hall, but let's keep in mind also their pass catchers, even though it wasn't an explosive offense, I felt they had a nice group of pass catchers last year, and they bring back the core of that this year as well. So it's a group that wasn't bad last year, and it's back, and it should be better with what they brought in. I think that's huge for his confidence, for his offseason, and we'll see what it means for the actual season. But knowing we were going to talk about Zach quite a bit today, Peter, I went back, I picked out 2 games to watch every throw that he made in 2 games from last year. I picked out his very first game at Carolina, and then instead of choosing one of his worst games, it is May, it's time to be positive, I chose the overtime win against Tennessee. And what I saw, what really impressed me the most, Peter, his best football, or he had a lot of good series after he had the typical, whether you want to say it's Jets quarterback-ish or rookie quarterback-ish, confusion, sacks, turnovers. He would have stretches of that. And then he played some really good series and made some big throws later in the game in a tight game. And I thought that showed some really good mental toughness, which is something you don't really know about a kid coming out of BYU. And we also saw a number of times, Peter, that ability that we saw in the pro day where it's like, wow, in an instant, he can make that ball go from here to there. I wonder if he can do that on Sundays. Didn't do it all the time, but you saw enough of it to go along with the mental toughness to where I read last year is a small win for him and what the team has done around him. I think there's every reason to be encouraged. Again, realistically, not playoff wise, but realistically, that this team could double their wins from last year.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And you'll hear from Joe Douglas a little bit later in the podcast, but did want to touch a bit on the Jets before we heard from Joe Douglas. Paul, next topic. What one top club official told me the other day, which is this was a really sensible draft. And I asked him, what you mean? He goes, well, people really didn't reach for players the way they normally did. And he used 2 things as an example. One quarterback picked in the top 70. Teams didn't say, I'm not going to. There's a lot of things that happen if you take a quarterback, let's say number 32 or even number 36 or number 40. You put expectations on him because of where he was picked. And in this draft, the next quarterback after Kenny Pickett, who's going to challenge for the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback job, the next quarterback was number 74, Desmond Ridder. When you're picked 74th, no one looks at you and says, well, okay, let's see. When's he going to play? October 1st, November 1st? Chances are, unless Marcus Mariota really struggles, Desmond Ridder is not going to see much, if any, playing time this year. Ditto with Malik Willis at number 86. When you're picked 86th in the draft, you're not expected as a quarterback to contribute right away. Carolina, Matt Corral, number 94. Okay, the exact same thing. If you're picked 74, 86, 94, no one sits there in your home market and puts pressure on you the way that Chicago Bears fans put pressure on Matt Nagy almost from the first day of training camp last year to play Justin Fields immediately. When you're a high first round pick, you're drafted in the first half of the first round, there's going to be that pressure. There's one other part of this draft, though, and we're going to get into this in a little more depth in a couple of minutes. But this actually, it was a club president said to me, the other part of this draft that I really liked was Minnesota trading down from 12 to 32. Time will tell who's right. Time will tell if Detroit got the better of the trade, if Jamison Williams, the wide receiver from Alabama, is going to be a great wide receiver and worth trading up for. But Minnesota traded down from 12 to 32, in the words of this guy, and he's absolutely right, because this is basically what the Vikings have said. They weren't in love with a player at 12. They needed a corner or corners, but they trade down to 32 and they get a hard-hitting safety, Lewis Cine, and basically they played the draft and said, rather than getting 3 picks in the top, I think it was 60, we'll get 4 picks in the top 65, and we'll be happier with that outcome, rather than taking a pick at 12 that we didn't love. And this veteran club president said, teams read this draft the right way. I just thought that was a smart thing to say, and that's kind of the way I view this draft. Give me your thoughts.
I want to back up so kind of what you started that with, Peter, and I love this topic about how it ended up with the quarterbacks. It wasn't a great group. It wasn't a super fun group that gave us a lot of headlines to really dive into throughout March and April, other than, man, will there only be one go in the first round, and does that one quarterback deserve to go? I think in the end, it's really best case scenario for the quarterbacks that went rounds 1 and 3, and also for the teams. And you brought up a couple of terms there: manage expectations that don't often go along with the quarterback and the draft. And I think it works for this year. And a couple of really good examples. Think about Kenny Pickett going at 20, and who's going to be his mentor there in Pittsburgh? Mitch Trubisky, at least for a year. How much different would Mitch Trubisky's life been if he would have gone at 20 instead of 2 when he came out? You wouldn't have this whole
such a smart thing.
They didn't take Patrick Mahomes and they took you. He had that over his head. As soon as Mahomes became Mahomes, there was really not a winning solution for Mitch Trubisky to be a decent to good quarterback in Chicago, because he always had that hanging over him. Look at Tua in Miami. They took you instead of Justin Herbert. Oh my gosh, what a mistake. He's got that forever as kind of part of whatever he does in Miami. Jalen Hurts also in the same class. There's pressure on Jalen in Philadelphia. Not nearly the same because he went in round 2. I love what happened there in this overriding theme with the quarterbacks.
Late in round 2 also.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. But these teams are kind of like taking them in rounds 3 this year, and also Kenny Pickett at 20 instead of the top 10. It's like, we're interested. We're intrigued, instead of we're attaching our entire franchise to you. Good luck dealing with that. So their camps may be disappointed where they went. I think it worked out really well for these quarterbacks.
Paul, you know what really brings me back to prehistoric times about this draft? And this just occurred to me last night when I was looking at it. When is the last time there was one quarterback and running back combined, Pickett at 20, and that was the only running back or quarterback picked in the top 35 of this draft? Breece Hall obviously was next at 36. But I think what we're seeing is basically the dawn of an era. We'll see if this year was an outlier or basically the start of something. But I believe what you're seeing is teams are no longer willing to say about quarterbacks, well, we don't believe in this guy all the way, but we kind of like him. So he's a quarterback, so let's take him 22. I'm reminded of the Browns taking Brandon Weeden I think, at 22. Now, nobody could have looked at Brandon Weed and said, he's the quarterback for the next 10 years. He was a chance that the Browns took, and Johnny Manziel. And I don't mean to just pick on the Browns, but a lot of teams have picked quarterbacks because they say, hey, it's an important position. Even though he's not flawless, let's take him. And I want to segue into the one sort of, I mean, casualty is the wrong word. I mean, it's a ridiculous word to use when we're talking about a draft. But you obviously every week are in close contact and do pods and have long conversations with Chris Sims. And I really respect Chris Sims and his analysis and his breakdown of quarterbacks. And this thought just occurred to me. I wish I had picked up the phone and called Chris for my column right after the draft and said, all right, Chris, I'm going to let you riff now. What did you think of Matt Corral, of 93 picks passing before Matt Corral gets picked, the guy in this draft who you love? So I'm sure you guys have talked about it. What did you think of that? And what did he think of that?
I think he was surprised that Matt Corral didn't go higher. I mean, unless he changed something at the last minute. I think I remember this correctly. I think he had Matt as his number one quarterback in this class. So the fact that a team gets him in the third round, I mean, Carolina, I am sure, thought long and hard about getting their quarterback in the future at 6. They get, according to Chris, the most talented one in the third round. And for all the reasons I just mentioned about managing expectations and what it means for the team and what it means for the quarterback, it's really perfect. And he gets to sit behind a guy in Sam Darnold. And what a crazy turn the last couple months have made for Sam. I mean, he is now the guy heading into the season. We didn't think that was going to be the case in the winter and a lot of this offseason. So it's a perfect snapshot of what happened in this class and the view of them going in. Chris thought this was the best guy, a team that needs a quarterback desperately, they think, gets him in round 3. I think it works out well for both sides.
Paul, this is not anything I want to spend a lot of time on, but I was really curious what you thought now. So the Las Vegas Raiders have basically, denuded their front office again. Really in the last year, they have been through 2 basically CEOs of their organization, 2 other top executives, and they made a change at general manager, made 2 changes at coach. And I wonder, just from your perspective, like, I look at this and I say, man, there are a lot of headlines, but I just don't really know how much this touches the football team. All the sort of mayhem going on with the owner, Mark Davis, and everything. I think, as I wrote in my column, if I were Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, I'd draw a line of demarcation between the football side and the business side, because obviously there's some problems on the business side. From your experience and just from your sort of knowledge of pro football, do you think that a player is really that concerned when the CEO of the team, they make 2 big changes in that one job over like an 8-month period? Or are you just going in and doing my job? Hey, there's nothing I can do about that. That's above my pay grade.
I don't think the player really cares or feels it. And I mean, for that side of it, Peter, I mean, you look at the Raiders, if they went from a team that hasn't been that good to, they were awfully close to winning a playoff game last year. So there's somewhere around good and competitive. And whether they take this jump this year isn't going to have much to do or anything to do with the business side. I mean, what are they going to do on 3rd and 7s against Herbert, Mahomes, and Wilson? Okay. Does the business side have that much to do with that? Probably not. I mean, can Derek Carr go from a really good quarterback to a top 10 type quarterback? I don't know if what's happening on the business side has much to do with if he makes that very difficult leap. I will say, and I don't ask this rhetorically, Peter, like I really wonder is there a team that's made a big leap or that has been living in the really good of the NFL, whether you want to pick out Baltimore, New England, any other team that's been good for a long time? Do they have this going on the other side of the building? I mean, is it a coincidence that no teams come to mind when I say, okay, business side is at least a temporary or permanent mess, but man, the head coach, GM, quarterback, coordinator thing is going great, and it does every year. I don't know if there's an example out there of a team. And if there is, I'd love to hear about it. But on one hand, yes,
No.
I agree with you. On the other hand, maybe there's a reason why we can't think of another team where the business side is in kind of permanent disarray, some version of it, and is still really good. I don't know if that exists.
Yeah, look, Mark Davis has always been sort of a shadowy figure. He isn't around the team as often as a lot of owners are, as far as, touching the players and all that stuff. But I think my overriding thought when I saw this story is, my first thought is, man, there's just too much mayhem around this team. My second thought is, look, Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler grew up in this business under Bill Belichick. And Bill Belichick's thought is, and I'm going to kind of crossbreed a bad cliche, but Bill Belichick keeps the main thing. And he doesn't care about any of the other stuff, or he doesn't care about what's going on outside the locker room, outside the building. You saw so many times the scandals that have racked the Patriots, and yet all they were a machine. They just kept winning. So I think that Belichick and Ziegler have been trained well. I don't think this is going to be a big deal for the Raiders. Next topic, James Bradberry cut by the New York Giants. So you could make the argument, Pro Football Focus could make this argument, that the Giants' most effective player, best player on defense over the last 2 years, it's not a slam dunk, but it could be, the quarterback, the cornerback of this defense, who was easily the best guy in that secondary, and was a guy who, when Joe Shane took over, he did not want to have to get rid of. But at the end of the day, I thought that that Paul Schwartz of the New York Post had a great statement in his story when he wrote about this, and I'm just going to read it to you. The sins of the past regime could not be reconciled by the current front office, and as a result, cornerback James Bradberry is no longer a member of the Giants. And the reason that that's perfect is James Bradberry is the kind of player that a winning team wants. Some team out there, maybe it'll be Kansas City. That's a team that I've heard is very interested in him. Somebody is going to get a good player out of James Bradberry. But the reason that this had to happen is that the past general manager, Dave Gettleman, signed some awful contracts that the new general manager has to live with. The contract for James Bradberry is excessive. I wouldn't call it awful because he's a good player, but it was excessive. And, the other options that were available to him were going to be more onerous. So they saved $10 million on the cap this year. They're going to have, I think, $10.7 million of dead money instead of paying him $21.8 million this year. So they saved $10.1 million, but it's just another example. In my opinion, the Giants stayed a year too long with Dave Gettleman, and it's really going to hamstring the recovery of this team. But I give Joe Shane credit. He bit the bullet. He took his castor oil. People of a certain age will know what I'm talking about. But he took his medicine, and he took it basically right from the start. He said to people that this is going to be a painful process. We're going to have to get rid of some good players. And this week, obviously, he got rid of James Bradberry.
I have one thought and one question about this, Peter. my thought is the salary cap. And when you inherit one that another boss left you, salary cap is going to force you to make some really difficult calls. And he had to make a tough call, so he did it. And for that part, if you're a Giants fan, I think you have to understand. My question is, why couldn't they move him? I know the contract wasn't great, but why couldn't they finesse it, adjust, and get some kind of draft pick for him in the last couple of weeks?
I think what happened, Paul, is that everybody knew that the Giants were going to have to cut. We're going to have to get rid of him. And when teams smell blood in the water like that, when opposing teams smell blood in the water, they basically say, hey, we understand that there's going to be blood in the water. We understand that you have to make this move. We're not going to bail you out and throw you a 5th or 6th round pick for a good player. We're going to wait until you do this, and then we're going to make our own deal with them. And we don't have to abide by the current contract. We're going to make our own deal with them. And I think that's exactly what happened in this particular case. And look, it's not like, that the Giants are in some great cap situation now. Okay. By making this cut now, they now have $14.7 million of cap space this year. So they will be allowed now, to sign all their rookies, to fund a practice squad, to have a little rainy day money left over. But that's exactly what was so important for the Giants to do in getting rid of this player. Now, I mentioned Kansas City, and Kansas City, if it so chooses, could have the money to do this. I'll tell you a team I would watch for. This is going to sound crazy. I would watch for the Saints. The reason I'd watch for the Saints is that the Saints have been in a lot of cap trouble, okay? But they're in a situation now where they got $19 million. They have more than enough to sign their draft choices now, led by Chris Olave. But I think this is a team that has wanted to get better in the back end. They've helped themselves a lot at safety, and obviously now with Tyrann Mathieu, but they still could use some help at the cornerback position. So, I think a good team out there is going to get better with James Bradberry. Paul, let's move on. When I was getting ready to try to figure out what to talk about this week, there were a lot of kind of semi-urgent things, but the one thing that really struck me when I wrote my column, and I got a lot of response from people, I basically said in my column that I thought that the Seattle Seahawks should basically not go out and get Baker Mayfield, who's a round peg in a square hole for the Seattle Seahawks. They want to be a running team with a traditional quarterback. Baker Mayfield is a run around, make things happen type of player. That's not really the offense that Pete Carroll and that offensive system is. So I say, don't go get Baker Mayfield. The Seattle Seahawks, in my opinion, this should be a year where they take their medicine. And this should be a year where they adjust and plot themselves for the future. Because just remember, next year, they have Denver's 1st and 2nd round picks from the Russell Wilson trade. They have their own 1st and 2nd round picks. Now, Denver could totally prove me wrong, but if Denver and Seattle both do not make the playoffs, that means that John Schneider and the Seahawks will have 4 of the top 50 picks in the draft next year. And my thought is it's going to be a very good year for quarterbacks. Hold your powder, relax, do the best thing you can this year for your team. Tell your owner, Jody Allen, look, we might go 4-13. We're not going to have a great year probably this year, but this is a year we can find out if Drew Lock is a keeper. And if he isn't, we can enter the draft next year with the kind of ammunition to go get one of these bright young quarterbacks. I'm really curious, Paul, on what you think of their quarterback situation and whether Drew Lock and Geno Smith is remotely realistic to get through a year. How do you look at it?
I look at the quarterback situation through the lens of not only the right now, Peter, but what they've had the last 10 years. And let's say Russell Wilson was still there. Questions throughout the team, but if you said, okay, let's talk about the NFC West, Paul. Who's the biggest challenger to the Los Angeles Rams? If Russell Wilson was there, Seattle's in the conversation, whether they should or shouldn't be, because they had always been when he's the quarterback. Now, because of the quarterback situation, I would say Seattle is the fourth team in the NFC West. And if with their current quarterbacks, Locke and Smith, if they're able to be competitive, I mean, that's a standard deviation or two up from what I expect. I mean, I don't think they'll get average quarterback play, NFL, circles wise, compared to what everybody else is doing with those two. Now, if there is such a thing and you bring it up, hey, let's take our medicine. Let's tell the owner we're going to have 4 or 5 wins. If there's a team that has a decade of goodwill equity that can get away with that, the GM head coach combination, it would be Seattle. If a team has a right to that, I don't know if they do or not, but if there is a team that does have a right to it, it is Seattle. But if they go with Smith and Locke, I think mediocre quarterback play would be a pleasant surprise for them.
Paul, the last item before we get to Joe Douglas is something that just was a topic from this draft that I didn't write enough about, I didn't talk enough about, I didn't really look into. So here in Detroit, they're very, very excited about this draft, about this year. Dan Campbell said he was at his daughter's, I think, volleyball match over the weekend, and everybody was coming up to him and said, hey, tell Brad Holmes he did a really good job. And usually they're, hey, coach, you're doing a great job with the Lions, but everybody was very happy with the Lions moving up from 30, obviously getting Aiden Hutchinson, and moving from 32 to 12 to get a guy who is acknowledged as one of the best receivers in this class, Jameson Williams, even though he's injured, he's got a torn ACL from the end of the Alabama football season. But I found this very interesting in talking to Brad Holmes. He said he's always had this philosophy: don't draft hurt players in the first round. And the thought as he was watching Jameson Williams and watching the receivers in this class, he just said, my gosh, Jameson Williams is so good, I might have to break my rule. So he came in about 2 weeks before the draft and told Dan Campbell, and Dan was euphoric when he said that because he loved Jameson Williams. So they ended up working out a deal, and a lot of people would say, oh, don't trade in your division. And my whole attitude when somebody says don't trade in your division is, why? If you are going to be better, if your team is going to be better, okay, and look, we don't know now whether the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions will be tangibly affected by this trade. It's easy to say, oh boy, that trade's going to make a huge difference. But, it was driven home to me. Brad Holmes basically say, we're not going to be married to what people think in the past was like forbidden. If it makes sense for our team, we're going to do it. And I'm sure that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah felt basically the exact same way. Paul, I just want to ask you this question. So I think the Detroit Lions are better with a potentially great receiver who may only play 4 to 6 games this year, but 2023 and beyond, he could be a top wide receiver in the NFL. Meanwhile, you've got the Minnesota Vikings, who, in my opinion, went into this draft really wanting to get better at both positions in the secondary. and wanted to prepare for the post Harrison Smith life. And they get Lewis Cine, a guy who was one of the top 5 players in terms of when I would ask people in the league, oh, who should I put in the first round who I don't have there right now? Everybody said Lewis Cine. I love this guy, love the way he plays, safety from Georgia. But they also, in making this trade, were also able to get 2 other corners in the first 120 picks, Andrew Booth Jr. from Clemson at 42, and also a Caleb Evans from Missouri at 118 early in the 4th round. And Paul, I think the way I look at this, and I've thought about it a long time, is that I would bet right now that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was going to be uncomfortable picking at 12. Even if he got Kyle Hamilton, I don't think he would have felt like that was a perfect player for their team right now. And he knew that there were safeties who were going to be available later in the first round and high in the second that he liked almost as much as Kyle Hamilton. I know that this is a weird topic, and I don't know precisely, because it's impossible to know right now who won. But I'm so curious of all the angles in this story. What really strikes you about 2 teams in the same division making this huge draft day trade?
I've always wondered about this old draft law, this unwritten rule that you can't trade within your division, Peter. And I'm glad two someones are starting to tear it down, because if you have your board and if you get a trade, and everybody always says we're open for business, so why do you shut down that business offer if it's within your division? So let's say that they make that trade with a team in the AFC. That team in the AFC with that player could screw them if they're playing them in December out of a win that they needed as well. Okay, so they don't play them twice in a season, but I've just never agreed with that philosophy. And so I'm glad Minnesota and Detroit did this. I'd like to see more of it. And I think bigger picture, Peter, I love how some of these old draft rules are being torn down. And again, look at the Rams. Is it a good idea? Brad Holmes says he doesn't want to draft injured players in the first round. Is it a good idea to trade high round picks to get a pass rusher in his 30s you're going to get half a season out of? Well, if it's Von Miller making plays in the postseason that contribute to you winning a Super Bowl, yeah, forget about that old rule that you never would have done that for the previous 30 years. It worked out because it was courageous, it was new, it was bold, and they were rewarded for that. So I like that these old draft rules are being chucked aside a little bit. And I've always thought teams, if they really want to make a deal and someone offers that deal, but, they're in our division, I've never agreed that they shouldn't be open to it. So to me, I like everything about it.
Mike Sando at The Athletic, I think he does a fabulous job. He wrote a column after the draft with, quoting a lot of, I guess, general managers, high front office people who he knows from his years covering the NFL. And I thought reading that, it was really enlightening, first of all. There's a lot of knowledge I picked up from it. But I sense that there still are a lot of, top GMs, top scouts, everything, who are essentially playing by yesterday's rules. Honestly, they are still, I think if you gave them sodium pentothal, they don't care if the Rams won the Super Bowl. Many GMs are like this. If it is not sustainable, they have no interest in it. I'd really love to talk to a bunch of general managers and just ask them, what would you rather be? Would you rather be a team that won 10, 11, 12 games every year and never won a Super Bowl? Or would you like to be a team that won a Super Bowl and it would be like you sold your soul to the devil and that's it? After that, you're just going to be scrapping and clawing and all that, which, by the way, isn't what the Rams are now, because they have Matthew Stafford. And they've got Aaron Donald for at least one more year. So they're not in that category. But I think sometimes, and I struggle with this too, because all the years of Andy Reid in Philadelphia, I remember saying to him on one of my training camp trips, I said, you know what I like about your team? This was maybe in 2008 or 9. But like I said, you know what I like about your team and your organization? Your fans, we were up at Lehigh where they had training camp at that time, university in northeastern Pennsylvania. Well, they were up at Lehigh, and I remember saying, I said, you know what I like about your team? Every July 30th, every August 10th, if you're an Eagles fan, you can be excited because you've got a legitimate chance to make a Super Bowl run. I'm not saying you're going to win a Super Bowl, but you're in the pennant race every year. And I like that. I think that is a really great, admirable way to go. But now I really struggle with thinking, would I trade? The Von Miller example is a great example. You know, you trade, I think it was the 64th and 96th picks in the draft and got whatever, 10 or 12 games out of Von Miller. And that's it. He's gone. But Paul, you said it. You said exactly the truth. I watched the postseason. I watched the Super Bowl. Von Miller was the second most important Ram, on defense, late in that, in that Super Bowl. I think the plays that he made, maybe third most important guy on defense, the plays that he made tangibly, absolutely were a big factor in them winning the Super Bowl. And so am I going to miss the 64th and 96th picks? Yes. Would we have won the Super Bowl without Von Miller? Maybe / probably, but no guarantee right there. I don't know. It's a topic that it's almost like you start pulling a thread and, you just keep going and going and going. And what you unearth is just really, it's one of the reasons why I found that there are really interesting topics to talk about in May about the NFL. Yeah. Because when I think about that, I say, man, that is really a heck of a deal. I'm sorry I took so long talking about that, but I don't know. Sometimes I just start thinking about things like that, about draft value, draft trades, reaching for players and things like that. And I just say to myself, hey, listen, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, we've been talking about the draft a lot. Since February, Peter, and we didn't hit any one of these weeks where we set up your podcast with the goal of talking about aggressive GMs and how old draft rules with trades have been thrown out. It kind of organically came up in a number of examples. And to kind of echo what you just said, that's why reflecting in May is fun. You can kind of look back and see what stood out and what still interests you. And we didn't seek out this topic. But as we had a goal of talking about the draft in hopefully insightful and interesting ways, it kept coming up with different teams in different ways. And I think it's fun when new themes like that come up, even though the draft has a lot of things that feel the same every year. It's cool that we get some new topics to address too.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.